Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and today we are going to go into the third video for the Necron Lore Deep Dive. I just want to begin by saying that it was completely irrational of me to believe that I would be able to create just one video on the Necron dynasties at the quality and the style of deep dive that I like to do. So these deep dive videos on the Necrons that I have been making are in reality just an introduction to the angle and the perspective that I will be using to explore the dynasties themselves. Part 1, 2, and now 3 of this video series are setting up the perspective that I have on the Necrons and will be followed by specific dynasty deep dives. In fact, almost immediately following this video, we're going to kick off the specific dynasty deep dives with the Charnavok dynasty. Plus, another thing I have to work on is making my videos a bit shorter. Not for any algorithmic reason, but the shorter that I make these videos, the more frequently that I can make them. However, one thing that I refuse to do is sacrifice depth for shortness, so it's going to be a balancing act. However, before I can do any of that, I have to go over a few more points that will finish off the perspective that I have on the Necrons before we get into the specific dynasties. These 3 points are the Silent King, the history of the dynasties, and the colors of the dynasties. I am increasingly curious about how far back I can trace the existing Necron dynasties and whether or not I can trace their history back to their Necrontier days. As I said in previous videos, we do not know which or if any of the current Necron dynasties are the same dynasties that existed before the expansion on the homeworld of the Necrontier. The Wars of Succession were a generally catastrophic time for the Necrontier as a species who already had short lives, killing each other. It is likely that some of the Necron dynasties that existed before it did not survive it or were otherwise subjugated by another dynasty during this time. Then the war with the Old Ones happened as they were pushed back to their homeworld. Perhaps a few more dynasties were lost during this time. After biotransference, the Necrons were strengthened, but the war in heaven was long and galaxy spanning, and perhaps it is another point in which a few dynasties were lost. Then the enslavement of the Satan occurred, followed by the Great Sleep. During both of these periods of time, legions of Necrons could have been lost. And so the existing Necron dynasties are the survivors of countless wars and the indifferent whims of a galactic force. And even still, some of the survivors who have done so only barely. I want to try to figure out just how far back these surviving dynasties go, and so this will be a focal point in my dynasty-specific deep dives. Something that will help me slightly is how each of the dynasty's lore refers to the Silent King in any accounts of their past. We can generally categorize which Silent King the lore may be referring to into 2 categories, Zarek and not Zarek. We know that Zarek was not the Silent King during the expansion, nor during the Wars of Succession, but he was the king after the first war against the Old Ones and before biotransference. Using this as a base for context, we can determine how the phrase the Silent King and the Triarch could be understood and at what time. Another thing that I wanted to go over is correcting a previous statement that I made about the Silent King and the nature of his command protocols during the War in Heaven after biotransference. At first, I understood the nature of his command protocols to be absolute in a way that made the Necron dynasties akin to mindless chess pieces against the armies of the Old Ones. But the more I research, the more I find that these figures of the royal courts kept most of their personalities during this time. However, the command protocols restricted them from infighting or double-crossing each other, which Necrons love to do. So the command protocols served more as inhibition devices, which on one hand made it so that the Necrons could not fight each other, and on the other hand, made all of the Necrons loyal to the Silent King and his will during the conflict. But it seemed that the guilt of biotransference weighed heavily on the Silent King. After sending the dynasties into the Great Sleep, he removed his command protocols from the Necron legions. By doing so, he returned an autonomy to the royal courts of the Necrons when they would eventually awaken, and this has resulted in the various dynasties and their pharaohs pursuing vastly different goals, exhibiting different natures and different temperaments. For better or for worse, this has also reintroduced the infighting and conflicts amongst the various dynasties of the Necrons as well. In regards as to how the dynasties distinguish themselves from each other, there are three primary means. The first is by their dynastic Ankh, which is itself a symbol that can tell a story about the Necrons' history or the history of a dynasty or another. The second is the use of heraldic colors. Necrodermis is metallic silver in its natural form, but it can be colored to represent the dynasty's royal family colors, which could also be used to tell a story about the history of a dynasty. Last but not least, their style of war and organization, which varied greatly and was defined at a greater scale after biotransference. I want to explore each of these points with the legions and seek to understand how these things may have changed over time. And with that ends the introductory deep dives that I will be doing before going specifically into the Necron dynasties. I know this was a short video. It was just pretty much tying up the loose ends of my introductory videos into the perspective that I have. And now we're going to kick off with the specific Necron dynasty videos and deep dives. Thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.